For the best aerospace era, this is the Mansplaining Podcast. Here's your host, Anthony L. Seeley.
Welcome, aerospace enthusiasts. Here on Mansplaining, I have often mentioned that early moment in my airline career when I first looked out on the south side of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, ATL, and saw numerous airlines lined up on the runways waiting for takeoff. This scene had a profound impact on me. I wanted to research the origins and history of the airlines that I saw. I also wanted to research other airlines that were long gone. This is something aviation enthusiasts can talk about endlessly. How about we do that on this Extra Section episode? Let's talk airlines with a man who has a true passion for airline history. Welcome back, everyone. Jeff Lester.
It's great to be here with you again, Anthony. Great to be here again, talking airline history, something we enjoy.
Before I introduced you as a former radio DJ, a musician, and also a B&A legend, but I forgot to mention that you're also a big fan of the band Rammstein.
Yeah, being from the South, you wonder how the heck I got involved in that. Part of stuff when I was in music, and I was DJing, playing in a band. I like a lot of different kinds of music, and then music, I can paint a picture when I listen to it, and a lot of times the music I listen to, some form of aviation will come into it somewhere. And a coworker, I'll leave his name out of it, but if you ever met him, you'd never forget him. Turned me on to this style of music, and I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure what style of music it is, but it's interesting. And they don't sing in English, and so but you just have to enjoy it. And I think I was watching a video on TV one time, and he was in the room, and I said, "Just who and what is this?" Rammstein. And then he just started sending me things. And what's that one song that I like a lot? Fire Fry, which is Fire at Will. Here comes an aviation. You hear the way the music drops, and you picture like Stuka dive bombers and stuff making that horrible sound with the speed brakes underneath their wings. So, yeah, if you ever meet me in person, you'll go, "No way."
Definitely.
But I do it, and Anthony here can back this up. I do have a T-shirt from the band.
Yes.
Yes.
I was very surprised to see you wear that. I was like, "Do you know what you're wearing?"
I said, "Yes, I do."
Well, let's get to why we're here. You're a big aviation enthusiast, and particularly a fan of airline history. The reason I wanted to have you come back on Mansplaining is to talk about one airline in particular. But before we get to that, let's do like we did back before when we used to talk about airlines. Let's talk about some airlines that have come and gone from any era.
Oh, and a lot of good ones too. And just things just fall by the wayside. Trucking companies, car companies, shipping companies, airlines. Ozark was always a good one. They used to come to the air show in Smyrna, Tennessee with a DC-9. And for $10, you could get a 30-minute sightseeing ride. And one of the good things about that is Ozark was opening up a chance to get on an airplane for people who wouldn't normally fly anywhere. For $10, you could fly around Nashville for 30 minutes in a DC-9. And I took a friend of mine, it was his first ever airplane ride. We went to the air show, he paid $10, and he got on a DC-9 and took off. And he loved it. He sat by the window. He just said, "Wow, this is incredible." Airlines, some used to do that back in the day. Southern Airways is another one, who merged with North Central, old Blue Goose up there in Wisconsin, to go on to form Republic, and then Northwest got them, and everybody knows all about that. Southern Airways used to fly to, one of the things I loved about old airlines, and the small ones are no longer around, even though they were getting bigger, Southern Airways, they had a Martin 404 that would land in Shelbyville, Tennessee, and another one that would land in a small town called Crossville. And it was regular scheduled passenger service. It would go Nashville, Shelbyville, I want to say maybe Huntsville or Birmingham, and then over to Atlanta. My dad we grew up on a big dairy farm. He was president of the American Dairy Association. Sometimes he had to get to Atlanta Real quick, we would drive down the road from our farm to the Shelbyville airport and put my dad on this Martin 404. They put on 3 or 4 boxes of cargo, some mail, and my dad from the rear stairs, and off they go. You know, those are the carriers I miss. Mohawk up in the Northeast, Bonanza out in the Nevada area. They helped pave the way for the airlines we have now, but sometimes how they were taken out of the game is not the best. But that's just the way business is. And we're fixing to discuss one that was really up and coming, and just, the way of the aviation world, it went another direction and took some good people with it. My wife being one, she was an employee of this great airline at one time. So that's this. If you sit down, when I retire from my job, I'm going to sit down for a week and catch up on every airline that's no longer in business, from as far back as the 30s when they had the small ones to right now. You'd be amazed at the list. Airlines you've never heard of. Big Apple Airways, the shuttles, and then you had, US Air had the Metroliners, I believe, the old 737-200s, what they called, Metroliners. Oh, I forgot to do my research on that one. I can during a break.
Well, I know some airlines I knew from, you mentioned Atlanta. That's the mecca of the airline industry.
Yes.
I know some airlines I remember from when I was growing up. One was called Kiwi Airlines. I think we've talked about that before.
Yes.
They were a low-cost airline. They weren't around for very long back in the 90s.
Used to run 727s out of Midway. You talking about a white knuckle ride?
And another one, some people might be surprised to hear, or at least people my generation, your generation, have heard this. Hooters Airlines.
Yes.
You remember that one?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, people might not know that existed.
And they actually had small regular scheduled service, limited. It wasn't just sports charters. My nephew's wife was a flight attendant. She wasn't a Hooter girl. She was an actual flight attendant on the limited scheduled flights. So yes, a lot of people don't remember that though. You and I do. We've seen them.
I would bring this up because, well, Spirit just went under, so Spirit's no longer gone. So the airlines come and go. We've seen a lot come, we've seen a lot go. But before we move on, I want to ask you one thing. Some say that's your face on the tail of the Alaskan Airlines planes. We need to clear this up. Is that your face?
No. If it was, we would be doing this in a professional studio, Anthony. I work in the industry, and every time I'll be at the airport, somebody will see one of the Alaska tails and go, "Oh, look, Jeff Lester's in town." So yeah, and I get a kick out of it. I like it, and sure, I wished I was. I think it's a household logo. You see that, and there's no airplanes around. You know it's Alaska. Great marketing on their part.
Yes. I want to tell you about possibly one of the first attempts at a passenger transport using airplanes. And we're going to have to go all the way back to 1914. I don't know if you know this story. Back in 1914, a company called the St. Petersburg-Tampa Airboat Line flew one passenger at a time across the bay for $5, which is about $160 today. And the plane they used was called a Banas Model 14. If you never heard of it, neither have I. But they were in business for like one season, like a summer season, because they would just fly people across the bay, which usually costs like 2-hour drive. But, like a 10-minute flight across the bay, get you there faster.
Yeah.
But I want to get your thoughts on that one. Have you ever heard that story?
I haven't, and I thought I'd heard a lot of them. I've seen pictures inside of old planes that had wicker seats in them, like lounge, like lawn chairs that were like bolted to the floor if they were even bolted. Flight attendants were nurses. They had on nurse uniforms back then. Now that story escaped me. You did your good research there, but I can understand that because somebody looked at that just like back in the days of the Wright brothers, and the Montgolfier brothers with the hot air balloons. They see a bird and they look at the bird and you go, how does he do that? It takes him no time to fly from point A to point B. So somebody in that airline looked at that and go, instead of driving 2 hours around the bay to get to point B, if we have to haul them one passenger at a time, Let's do that and make it a 10-minute flight with a headwind. And that to me, that's another marketing genius. You know, you look at that and you go, yeah, we can do that. That's fascinating. And one passenger at a time, you have to think there wasn't a whole lot of people in the world back then either, you know. You talk about a backlog now if you had to do that.
We're talking 1914. This is when I talk about the wood, wire, and fabric flying machines. They're not really airplanes. These are just flying machines, flying contraptions.
Yeah, they
You
were
wouldn't even call them airplanes at this
wooden
time.
wings hooked to wooden fuselages with a canvas and dope glue on them. Yeah, think about that, you know.
Well, I got this story from the book The Airplane. How Ideas Gave Us Wings by Jay Spencer, by the way, which I recommend to everybody.
Yeah, he's a great writer.
Now, 1914 wasn't the best time to start an airline, but a prime time, I believe, to start an airline was the late 1940s. There were many aircraft options that were safe and large enough to make a profit. And think about all the experienced pilots that were from World War II, and also the veterans looking for work. And I believe this is a time where your favorite airline came into being.
That would be Piedmont.
Yes.
One of my favorites. At the end of World War II, you know, the passenger plane of choice, or was soon to become a choice, was the DC-3 or the Dakota. You know, some people call it a Goonie Bird. Because you could easily put aircraft seats in them and the configurations how you wanted. Each airline had a different seating configuration. American boarded their DC-3s from the number 2 side. Majority carriers had a boarding from the number 1 side. And that's a story in its own right about why American wanted them boarded like that. You should do a show on that. I won't spoil that for your listeners. That's a good one to research on, and the quirkiness of some of the CEOs. That's something you could do. But then you've got this whole plethora of military flyers that are looking for a job. Okay, here's the airplanes. There's what they flew. Let's train them in the world of the airline and get these planes out there. That's why there's so many, you know, DC-3s, and then you had the, you know, DC-4s and stuff coming into play, the 4-engine jobs, and then, you know, on down the road you had the Connies, and these guys had flown combat missions, so flying into Chicago in bad weather was nothing for them. They're used to getting shot at. So yeah, you're right. That was the prime time to get into that, you know. And then you know, Ford making the tri-motor, and TWA was big in that. And it started a whole evolution. It started such a big time competition here with airlines. We can get you here faster. Orders for bigger, faster airplanes are coming in. We have the largest fleet of DC-3s. We can fly overnight. Some DC-3s were overnighters and had sleeper berths in them, like trains. So then you had marketing people you had to hire. You had to get routes, the old CAB, which is now the FAA. You had to go through all that governing body and stuff. And, you know, right at the end of World War II on, it's just been, you know, can you borrow the door with the airlines? And to coincide, to run with the airlines, you got to have trains and trucks to get cargo and stuff from one point to another. We can get this truckload here, but we go take it to the airport because it's going to go to California overnight instead of like 7 nights over the road or 4 nights with a train. But see, all that works together. You know, the company I work for, we have trucks come to the airport, offload boxes, we put them on airplanes. So you have all that to go into it together. So, I mean, the transportation world, I mean, even shipping in some of the airports that are near port cities, it's the same way. If I could go back in time and be in aviation, that'd be a good time, because look how many groundbreaking things happened in just commercial. Also groundbreaking in military, but groundbreaking, period. You know, you see pictures of kids and their parents at airports seeing a DC-4 or a DC-6 or a Connie, and hundreds of people have come out, because even in the 40s and 50s, commercial was new. Commercial flying was new. You drove cross country in, 10, 12 days? Hey, this airline here with the new DC-6 can get you cross country in 7.5 hours. And you look at that and just go, how? Coming up in the aviation world after World War II was phenomenal. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to go to the airport and just gawk at the airplanes. When my dad flew out of Nashville Airport, they had an observation deck on top. You'd see all kinds of 707s, 27s, Electras, Martin 404s. Saw my first Connie there. And with all the developing, all the cool airplanes coming on, it kept people interested. And then you get to thinking about, hey, I got a good team of people around me. Let's start this airline, TWA, Piedmont, Ozark, Mohawk up in the Northeast. And then your competition gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And hey, we want to get this group of people over here. I want to get this group of people over here. Hey, we fly to Chicago in 4.5 hours. I'll get you there in 3.5. And then the golden age aviation is born. And it wasn't, it was, for lack of a better term, I guess, my wife and I discussed this a few times, it was a more glamorous style of travel back then, both for flying, working, and passengers. And it was glorified in the Hollywood movies. Casablanca, the classic DC-3 in the fog. Look how they're dressed. And it's just, oh, you work for an airline. Wow, cool. And I still get that. I still work in the airline and I still get that. And they go, hey man, how cool is that? And it's got its ups and downs. It's got its hurdles. But I tell them, I said, hey, I've been in almost 26 years. There's something good about it. So, yeah, in how all these other airlines, and some of them started off, if I'm not mistaken, Southern started off as a railroad and then became an airline. So it comes from that part of transportation. And you had CEOs that knew how to run a business, but also knew how to treat their people. And that's where we're fixing to talk some about Piedmont. Mr. Davis comes into play. He was good friends with Herb Kelleher. We know what Herb Kelleher was at Southwest. Who was in turn friends with Gordon Bethune, and we know what he was like at Continental. So you could do a whole show, Anthony, about CEOs sometimes. I mean, you really could.
Yeah, speaking of Tom Davis, that's what I found. He was the founder of Piedmont, because I know you're such a big fan about Piedmont. I had to do some research on my own. He bought a company called Camel City Flying Service in 1940 and later renamed it to Piedmont Airlines. And under his leadership about a decade later, that's when they became a commercial airline in the late 1940s, like you were talking about. But they had a different strategy than the other airlines that were already established. They kind of served the smaller markets.
Yes.
And I know you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I've always been a fan of the airlines that wanted to serve smaller markets. Your trunk carriers, they went to your bigger cities, your hubs, Eastern, TWA, American, where airlines like Piedmont, Southern, Ozark, they served the smaller ones. My very first 737 ride was a Piedmont 37-200 that went from Memphis to Nashville, then went to Asheville, small city up in the mountains, and eventually wound up in Hampton Roads, Virginia. Well, the bigger carriers weren't doing that route. They would stop in Charlotte. Ozark, Cape Girardeau, they flew to Clarksville, Tennessee. Even though the Nashville had an airport, they flew to Clarksville, flew to Owensboro, Kentucky. The CEOs and the people behind them and with them saw what the bigger airlines were doing. But what about the little town over here in the Midwest where the nearest big airport that somebody fly to us 200 miles away? We can get equipment to fly into these smaller runways. And these people that live in this area who want to travel, they can drive 20 minutes down the road across farmland to get to an airplane. It may only be 2 or 3 flights a day, but that's more than what they got now. And we'll take them to Chicago. We'll take them to St. Louis. Or we'll take them to one of our other small but yet a little bigger cities to put them on an airplane to get them there. And that also enhances their experience. And it's going to cost you, but it's not going to be an arm and a leg, because back then a lot of people didn't have an arm and a leg spend. But they didn't have access. The airlines wanted to grow and grow and grow. So let's go to Smallsville, Iowa, and get them to St. Louis, Missouri. Even if it's just one flight a day, they have that opportunity. And I always have been and always will be a big fan of the airlines that serve the smaller cities. Now today, some of the bigger airlines do serve some of the smaller cities, but these airlines here, like Piedmont, Ozark, Southern, Bonanza, grew, expanding and expanding, but hitting the smaller carriers and giving good customer service. Yeah, Piedmont got me from Asheville to Atlanta in no time, safely. Yeah, I'm gonna fly them again, even though you know yourself, Atlanta had 30 airlines going in there. That's how you build loyalty, and your smaller airlines knew what loyalty was about.
And this Piedmont would be the airline any of these small communities know. They don't know Delta. They don't know TWA, especially not Pan Am, because Pan Am, their market was international.
Yeah,
So they don't even know these airlines exist. But Piedmont, they're right down the street. I know Piedmont, you know.
yep. And you used to see billboards near airports advertising airlines. And whenever you was in the Carolinas, from Knoxville all the way to the Atlantic coast, you would see billboards advertising Piedmont everywhere. And Piedmont was based in, I believe, Winston-Salem. And eventually they grew into a big hub in Charlotte. But when you built up your customers and your loyalty, and you said fly Piedmont or fly Southern, people go, wow, they'll get me from Smallsville to Macon, Georgia in less than 4 hours. Yeah, I'm going to give them a shot. So it cuts down their travel time. They have a great time. Kids love the airplane. Noses pressed against the windows. I mean, I know some adults. I'm the same way. My nose pressed against the window. And they get there. They get to visit family or go to the beach or whatever. And they come back and they go, how was your trip? Let me tell you how my trip was. First of all, I will fly them again. That's the whole premise behind the smaller carriers. And all the airlines want that. It was a loyalty program before there was points or anything like that. And it was all done through customer service, which unfortunately a lot of things have gone by the wayside due to the bottom line. Bottom line has always been important, but these gentlemen and these women who worked in the early days of these small airlines knew you had to make people want to come back. Not just because you have a low price, but you made them feel like a human being. Hey, I'm glad to see you on my DC-3. Can't wait to see you again. That's how they feel. That's how it goes. And that was the big premise behind the smaller carriers. You get loyalty from the Midwest and the farmland that's going to fly to a bigger city. They'll always stick with you, you know. And we're going to provide that with the smaller carriers to get to the bigger cities. And some of these airlines grew to be bigger ones. Ozark was decent size when they merged with TWA. Southern was growing. They had flights into New York and stuff like that and everything. And you know, speaking of small cities, they would fly to Memphis from Nashville, but every now and then they would have a flight that went Nashville, Jackson, Tennessee. Who flew into Jackson? Nobody did. There's an airline today that resembles these old small city carriers. Contour will fly Tupelo, Mississippi, stuff like that. The Southern, I believe Southern used to run 404s in there. Don't quote me on that. That's a whole other show. But Contour is following that. And Contour doesn't have a big fleet. They don't have big jets. They got RJs, CRJs. But they're servicing Tupelo. They're servicing Owensboro, Kentucky, places like that. So there's an important place for them. The aviation world's a big pie. There's enough for everybody. It's just some people don't want to share it. You know, and it's called competition, Anthony. You know, it's called competition. Piedmont, they survived a lot longer than some of the ones that started out small. They grew to where they were flying to Gatwick out of the Carolinas. They brought, I think it was 767 200 ERs. And we're flying overseas to Gatwick out of there. Had healthy runs to Denver, New York. The Pittsburgh Steelers would charter them for their road games. I saw them in Kansas City. It was a Piedmont 727. Then you got into NASCAR gets into the deal. Ricky Rudd, Terry Labonte run the Piedmont car. I think Labonte won the NASCAR championship in that car one year. Okay, here's where your marketing comes in. Piedmont started off small. They're growing. They're getting bigger. They're big in the South, in Orlando, Dayton, Ohio. Back then, NASCAR was popular. You couldn't get a ticket for nothing. Well, they put Piedmont on the side of a hauler, on the side of a race car. Every Sunday, it's 100,000 people are going to see that car going around circles. The official airline of NASCAR, Piedmont. And they had a great marketing campaign. They kept their fleet updated. And they would buy aircraft to work with their routes. They had the Martin 404s, they had the Fairchild 227s, the Hiller 27s. Which, if you look at it, it's the same airplane. Well, a little bit different, but they're still designed the same. The F-28s, Fokkers, 737s, where were they going to be able to go? Japanese-made commercial aircraft, the YS-11. YS-11. I mean, Piedmont bought several of those to fly them into places like Jackson, Tennessee, maybe, Owensboro, Kentucky, a dirt strip in North Alabama somewhere if they had to. They didn't, but you see where I'm going with this. They would see a route that they wanted to do. How can we service people? What kind of aircraft can we use? What kind of aircraft do we need? They bought a multitude of different kinds and spread them out. They had DC-3s as well. Gosh, it was a well thought out battle plan. Herb Kelleher almost did the same thing. That's why him and Mr. Davis were good friends. They kind of had the same mindset. But Davis is one who, among several, who not only plowed the ground, but he planted the corn as well. If that makes any sense. You can tell I'm from the South, ladies and gentlemen. But that's one thing. I mean, I can look at a small time carrier today and think about what would you be like in '51 if this person was running you, or I hope you make it. I'm pulling for you because the world needs the small city carriers as well. We really do. We really do. When I retire, I want to fly on some of them just to support them. Hey, let's give it a shot. Let's go Tupelo. I hope that made sense what I was saying there. I wasn't trying to go in a roundabout way, but anybody who knows me that listens to this will know that I've probably used hand gestures about 2,000 times and nobody can see it because it is something I'm very passionate about. It's what we're talking about. And my wife, I'll go ahead and tell you now, she was a Piedmont employee. Wound up at Continental eventually. And she'll tell you real quick, Piedmont was a great airline. And you won't convince her no other way because there's no other way it was. It was a great airline. And we know some people who worked for them about the same time my wife did. And we can go into, we have an aircraft memorabilia show coming up. It takes Joan an hour to get past first table. Why? Because first table's full of Piedmont people. She wears her Piedmont shirt. I said, I'll see you later. But Piedmont was a family as well. And I didn't know anybody that worked for Southern or Ozark. But I knew people that worked for Piedmont. And I'm sure the other ones were a lot the same way. Because that's just what they were. It was a big family back then. And Joan has, Anthony knows this. I have a lot of memorabilia here. Some of it's Piedmont. All the Piedmont stuff's upstairs. It belongs to Joan. And you'll see some pictures later. I brought two of the models downstairs and I had to sign them out and put a deposit down to make sure I brought them back.
I'm sure they're clean too.
Oh, they're pristine.
Yeah. I'll share some of those pictures of those models in this book you have here on my Best Aerospace Era page. Yeah, I know we talked about the NASCAR connection. I think I saw a screenshot of a Piedmont said the official airliner of the NASCAR. I would never imagine that. They came from NASCAR country. That's North Carolina. They came from NASCAR country, but from what I know, NASCAR people usually like to take an RV and go from city to city, but I can see if there's times when they want to fly, they're like, hey, I've seen this airline, so I'm going to go fly them instead of, one of the others.
Yep.
And also you talk about the DC-3 is a perfect kind of airplane to start with the short routes between smaller cities that, the larger airlines, like we talked about before, aren't going to touch.
You can land a DC-3 anywhere.
Yeah.
They were tough. They proved themselves in World War II.
Definitely. And also, I think we talked about, two modern airlines. I think Breeze is one, and I think that CEO looks back to airlines like this and like, where the big boys ain't flying. I'm going to go to those cities and serve them because they're not being served, and I'm going to have a business there because no other airline's serving them. So that's kind of a strategy you see over and over again. It obviously worked. I've seen Piedmont actually grow up to be the 8th biggest airline in the U.S. at
Yes,
one point.
at one time, yes.
That's hard to crack.
Yeah, and they had good routes, a lot of routes, and carriers wanted them. And that was about a time when a carrier that was a little bit bigger wanted extra routes and extra airplanes and went after somebody that was doing really good. And when the U.S. Air deal went through with Piedmont, Tom Davis had already stepped away from the table, which he probably, if he, and everybody has to retire eventually. If he could have stayed in there a few more years, Piedmont might have lasted a few more years. But things change. And it's, sometimes my wife and I will talk about it, and she'll get real quiet about it and start thinking about stuff, because that was a great time in her life. Now, she retired 30-something years in the business because she went to Continental and stayed there 4 more years after the United deal went through. So she had when we got married, we can talk in acronyms that nobody understands. And we tried to get her on the air, ladies and gentlemen. She will not come do that. I tried so much. She will not talk, but she's a good. I can ask her a Piedmont question today, and she'll tell me if it's something I need to ask her about. But it's when I remember I was growing up, Piedmont was big time. I flew them several times. My dad did, and when they ceased to exist as far as Piedmont goes, I thought it was sad in my own right, because I said, dang, what's happening here? They're a great airline, had great colors. Love their colors. Their color schemes were great. And then as I got older and got into the business, I learned more about how much more of a business it was. And it's customer service is still there. It's kind of hard to find. You don't talk to a human as much anymore. And I don't like that. But a lot of these, back in the day, they were based on customer service to a point, and I wish we could go back to that, but I don't know, can anybody afford to go back to knowing your pilot's first name and you're a passenger? I don't know if you can or not, because the world moves too fast.
Definitely, we're too busy staring at our phones.
Yeah.
But one other fact I came across, I can't confirm this, but I saw it on one of the Piedmont Facebook pages. Piedmont operated the first ever all-female flight crew on a jet airliner in 1982.
That's exactly right.
So
that's exactly right. The complete one. Let me pull up my notes here. Okay, the Piedmont Airlines all-female flight crew, July 2nd, 1982, when Flight 328 from Norfolk to Newark marked the airline's first all-female flight deck and cabin crew. First flight, 1982, Captain Cheryl Faye Peters, First Officer Rebecca Rose Schroeder operated the cockpit alongside flight attendants Paula Lanier, Dolly Winat, and Cindy Perry on a Boeing 737-200. And they were known for using all-female crews throughout their history. But that was a milestone. And we just passed that recently, July the 2nd. And a lot of hard-working women in aviation. You're going to hopefully hear in this not too long future have 2 of them on your show soon. So we can talk on that towards the end of it. I'm going past it. I'm not a very good guest, am I? I take your notes and just manipulate them. But hats off to everybody that works good in the industry. The women who have had to fight and fought hard to get where they are now. Support them. I'm not scared to fly with an all-female flight crew. No, there's something kind of badass about a woman flying a jet fighter in my book.
Yes. Yeah, definitely a good shout out to all the females out there in aviation. Now, we've talked about this before. In the 1980s, the premier airlines like Pan Am and Eastern, they were struggling financially, and they went out of business from different factors like deregulation, like you talked about, the economy, and also just changing passenger habits. So Piedmont failed in the 80s, but why is that?
The 80s was a big time of consolidation. Because you had the Eastern doing their thing, TWA beyond the 80s with the American. The American got a lot of carriers. It had to do a lot with consolidation during the late 80s. Mergers were common as airlines sought to increase efficiency and market share. And that's where we come in and talk about earlier about routes and stuff like that, because Spirit's no longer with us. And there's a scramble to try to get those routes in and out of the Caribbean down there, much less the slots up in the Newark area and LaGuardia. Which it's all, man, a lot of stuff goes on the airlines where there's rooms and no windows. You know what I mean? Financial pressures, cost of fuel, labor, cost of paying your employees. It's never gone down. If it goes down, you're not going to be in business long. Because a worker making $42 an hour in the airline industry now is not going to take a pay cut because gas went down or anything like that. No, they're going to, because their food's not going down. So then, you got those pressures and maintenance pressures. You can get a hammer at a hardware store for $8. You put aviation in front of that hammer, it's $408 for the same blooming hammer. It's just like it with healthcare and military, same thing. Strategic growth as well. Do we need these routes here? Do we want these routes? What can we grow from this route over here? So they look at some of their bigger cities. Oh, we can get into there more. Piedmont was prevalent in Baltimore. Well, so was US Air too. And because if one got the other, then they don't have to move too far down the road to occupy the homes. You know what I mean? They're all the gates right there. And I've worked at Baltimore Airport. I see some of the old gates that were there because it's been a long time since I've been to the Baltimore Airport. But the merger with US Air allowed Piedmont to expand its reach and integrate into a larger network, but they just didn't keep the brand. It became US Air. It's what it did. And this is just what's printed on paper. And US Air eventually got them and absorbed them, and they ceased to exist as Piedmont Airlines. There is one called Piedmont Commuter now, but it's not the same as the Piedmont Airlines, even though it operates under the same type name. You ever talk to a Piedmont employee, they'll give you probably more in depth than what I just gave you on that, and probably a little more colorful with some of their comments on that. And we can't do that here, but it's consolidation. Anthony, it all boils down to competition. How much more of a bigger dog am I than this person here? Or how much more can I absorb up over here and push this person out? A lot of big dogs on the porch, just how many of them want to jump off and get in the fight? And how many of them are just going to, sit back and go, I don't have enough to be in this fight anymore. My opinion, that's pretty much what it boils down to. And I work in the industry, and sometimes I can sit and just look at things and just go, I don't know how much more longer they can do that. And mergers and takeovers and buyouts and going out of business. I'm blessed to have never been involved in anything that I've ever done career-wise in my life that I've had an abrupt change. That's a life changer. My wife had her life changed twice with 2 different airlines. I know people that's only done one, but it's a bitter taste in their mouth. And it comes down to consolidation and competition. And today with the media outlets and stuff that we have, something that us who have worked in the industry look at something and go, oh, that's very minor. That's very minor. That rarely ever happens. Or that's something that's just minor enough it happens every now and then. The media will blow it up to where it's like an all-out war on something. And then that starts, people who don't dig in and find the facts will say, well, I'm never going to fly them again. Okay. But enough of that happens, you start getting a bad reputation. It can hurt you. It can hurt you. And I think maybe some of Spirit's problems was because of that. And because I talked to some people recently that work for Spirit, they were okay with them. But if you get a black eye for whatever reason out there, the media is not gonna let that go. And I didn't realize how many media outlets this world has got until I watched something on the news not too long ago, and they had all these news outlets that had given them content. I'm like, I never heard of these, but there's thousands of people looking at it, and word of mouth and something that we see as minor can cause you problems down the road. And you're not only consolidated then, you're completely swallowed up out of business and taken over, and your planes are grounded. You know.
Honestly, I have been through a buyout merger, but that's a story for another time. And we'll talk about that competition thing and about the market itself here in a moment. But for anyone who wants to learn more about Piedmont Airlines, there is a Facebook page called the Memory of Piedmont Airlines Facebook group, if you want to go check that out.
Yeah,
But it's different than the commuter airlines. There is a commuter airlines called Piedmont now, but they just bought the name rights to Piedmont name. They're not the same company at all. Piedmont was already gone, and they just bought up the name because the name does mean something, even though it's not the
Yes.
same company.
They started out using Dash 7s.
No.
Yeah.
Now, as we talked about, like the mergers and everything, we have a lot of big airlines today. It's different than what we're talking about back in the my era, which is pre 1975. You had many airlines like Pan Am, TWA, Piedmont, Delta. You had more airlines, and now we just have a lot of big airlines. Do you think the market's better this way with bigger airlines, or were we better off with multiple airlines with their own territories?
I think the more competition you have, the better your product is. If you've got 5 airlines that's flying from say Nashville to Chicago, you want to fly on the one that's going to be the best for you. The competition to make passengers want to fly on them, whatever carrier it may be, is healthy. So, we offer this, that, and the other in the cabin. We'll have free this or free that. Well, you fly on us, buy one, get one free drinks, because all your soft drinks going to be free anyway. You used to get a meal between Chicago and Nashville on Delta. I flew with my parents several times, and we had chicken and roast beef. Seriously, it's an hour and 20-minute flight. You don't get a meal pretty much anywhere unless you're going to head overseas. I've had some breakfast sandwiches on some morning flights to Texas. They were good, but it wasn't like, I'm proof in the pudding that they don't serve food much anymore on domestic flights, because we have a whole cabinet full of airline china that used to be on planes going between New York and San Francisco. I don't know if they serve any kind of meal on longer haul flights, as far as say like New York to Los Angeles or San Francisco or something. That would be for somebody who's done that before. I don't know, but I remember you used to get a meal on Delta from Nashville to Chicago. But the more airlines you have out there, yeah, you got a lot more airplanes in the air, but competition is healthy. I hate to see an airline go under for several reasons. The employees, you hate to see them all of a sudden, I don't have a job. I pray for any of the airlines. I prayed hard for the people for Spirit. But you also see your competition. Well, hey, by golly, I ain't got to try as hard to get these people to Chicago now. We lost an airline, and another one may be in trouble here soon. So, hey, we'll just serve you some apples and here's some raisins. Competition is healthy. I want to see 30 airlines trying to get me the best way to Europe sometime. You don't want to have state-run airlines. You don't want that. I've been in countries where they had a state-run airline. And I was go, wow, really? You don't want that. We have one of the best airline systems in the world in this country. Let's keep it that way. Part of that's competition. And you mentioned Breeze a little while ago, small up-and-coming carrier. Man, I wish them well, because that's competition for somebody. Was it Avelo? They're coming around. They're in Nashville quite a bit. They're coming around. I think they're based out of Houston. As a matter of fact, they bought some old Southwest 37s. And they're starting to make a little noise in some places. They got a big billboard on the interstate near the Nashville airport. Man, there hadn't been an airline billboard around that airport in a while. So you have to spend money to keep yourself competitive. Competition's healthy. It is. It's real healthy. Can it get watered down? Yeah, it can get watered down. But you got to have the right people in the right places in your offices to make sure it doesn't get watered down. Because I want 30 airlines competing for my business to London. I do. And I'll go with the one that I think is best for me. And if it ain't good, I'll go somewhere else. But I want that competition. I want the competition. You go to a grocery store, there's not one or two kinds of soda. There's a whole aisle of sodas. So I've never heard of. That's called competition. There's 7 grocery stores within 5 miles of each other. They're all different ones, but it's competitive and it's healthy. And they try to bring the savings of the food prices to you. The more competition you got, the lower your ticket prices are. Now, you got problems with your fuel. Man, that's a whole other ballgame. There's a whole team of lawyers that deal with that right there. So that factors into your tickets. But still, competition. And then, there's one airline out there that likes to hedge their fuel. Well, that's a smart move. I don't know how much they do it now, but back in the day, they hedged the heck out of it. And that's why they kept their tickets prices so low. And they keep ticket prices low by giving you less. Or charging you for a bag of potato chips on some flights. Well, I'm going to bring my own. So flying it needs to be super competitive. It needs to have the more food options. It needs to have the softer seats. It needs to have people smiling on the planes again. Just getting the airport alone is a chore. Yeah, you go through TSA. That's a necessary thing. Ever since 9/11, we've had to have that. And by the way, thank you to all the TSA agents too. They go through a lot of stuff. I get to the airport. I'm going to leave the airport a little bit. No, man, they got 8-10 hours of it. So, shout out to those people. I'm glad you're here. So I think competition is needed, Anthony. I'd like to see more of it. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to.
Yeah, not the way things are going right now. It doesn't look that way. Well, I want to thank you for coming on. But before we go, do you want to tell everybody what your plans are for next year?
Yes, I'm going to retire from my airline job. Maybe then I'll tell you who I work for. But as I spent time, as Anthony said earlier, in radio. And I've had 3 full-time jobs, mainly farm radio and the airline business. So I'm going to start my own podcast, mainly because my wife doesn't want me bored out of my mind when I retire. But it keeps me in touch with the industry and people like you people out there, ladies and gentlemen, listen to this podcast, whatever you're doing. I stay in touch with people like Anthony, Audrey, who used to work in the airline business, still in the travel industry with her hotels. That's fantastic. The guys I work with, they're going to be part of the show sometimes. If you want some aviation comedy mayhem, you listen to that round. You listen to that round table bunch. Anthony knows, and Mr. Anthony's going to be a part of the show. I already have my logo out, and it's going to be Sky Pirates Radio. So it's going to be, and that's part of my old crew that I work with. We have our own patches. You're fixing to mention 2 people in an aviation race. They had one of our stickers on the airplane, and I want Anthony. I want you as a guest on my show, and I want to continue to be a guest on yours. And I'm going to promote your show, and I'm only going to charge you a Coca-Cola.
Can't go wrong with the Coke.
No, nothing wrong with the Coke at all. And hey, by the way, coming up August 28th in Cleveland, if you're in that area, Strongsville, at the Best Western Plus, the Cleveland Airline Memorabilia Show. Bob Palermo and the gang put on a great show there. I will be there. One of the guys in my crew is going to be there. My wife's going to be there. If you want to talk Piedmont Airlines, she'll meet you at the door with her shirt on, and you just sit down and have a cup of coffee. That's coming up in Cleveland, August the 28th. I like to push that show because that's one of my favorites.
Excellent. Well, nice having you on. We'll do it again sometime.
Anytime, Anthony. And shout out to our air traffic controllers. Thank you for everything that you have to do. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you so much for listening. And remember, there's always a light at the end of the runway.
Follow the Mansplaining podcast for more stories from the best aerospace era, or go to bestaerospaceera.com or find us on social media.